Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight I have a collection of Stalker stories for your listening pleasure, and I'm sure you're going to leave sufficiently creeped out. I would also like you to welcome Miss Fearsome, a regular collaborator on the channel, who has helped me with a few stories in tonight's video. I'm sure you'll love them. But for now it's time to get comfortable. Relax. Don't look out that window, I'm certainly not there, and let the darkness take control. My high school counselor was a creep and a stalker. This took place in the 80s. I'm half Hispanic, half Japanese, and when I started high school I didn't know a single word in English, and speaking Spanish or Japanese was frowned upon. So I relied on my school counselor, who was also Hispanic and quite friendly and helpful and extremely attentive. Mr. Miranda was a short, stubby, wrinkled man in his 60s with deep stained yellow teeth, thick bushy moustache and awful breath. He always wore thick Coke bottle glasses and was always finding reasons to pull me out of class, or he would wait for me at the end of school. The funny thing is, he always knew where I was. He would take me to his office and would close the office door and often lock it. Most of the time he complained about his kids and how he hoped his kids were as studious as me. He would always say how beautiful I was and how smart I was for being able to start high school a year younger than typical Americans. I would always awkwardly reply, "Gracias," or nod my head respectfully. At first I didn't sense anything wrong, but slowly I felt uncomfortable going to his office for conversations that had nothing to do with my progress as a foreign student. And the way he would pick my chin up with his cold, hairy, nasty hand with his long bony fingers, and would salivate by complimenting my full lips and slanted Asian eyes. I was most definitely trying not to get too close, as I was avoiding his nasty, smelly breath, which was horrendous. If you're familiar with how a dead animal smells, this is far worse. Often a misty shower would escape his mouth, and depending on how much he would corner me, a lot of it would end up on my face. I was young, naive, and very cute, new in this country, and wasn't sure if this was normal behavior for a high school counselor. Mr. Miranda would usually get close. He also had a thing for my hair, and would either touch it or smell it. When that occurred, I would back off, and he would sound offended and complain that I wasn't humble anymore and that the American culture wasn't for me. Not knowing who to tell and what to say, I endured being his prey for a little longer. I had been taught to respect my elders and do what was asked of me no matter what, with no questions asked. The touch from this grotesque man bothered me. It made me grind my teeth. I wasn't used to being touched. My mother was the only one who did once in a blue moon, with a hug or something. I had just become a member of an extended family, and I didn't want to get into trouble, as my closest family members were very trustworthy, and was so grateful that Mr. Miranda was also so interested in helping me with my education. Sometimes I would cut school, but then Mr. Miranda would find out. And that would give him another excuse to take me to his office after school, with the door closed, and he'd scold me. Mr. Miranda would tell me that if I skipped school without telling him where I was or who I was with, he would send me to another counselor, who wouldn't know a word of Spanish or Japanese, and that I would surely fail. I was so scared, since I was new to this country and the school and didn't want to disappoint anyone, so I tried not to skip school as much, which in the long run helped. His typical questions were, "You haven't kissed anyone yet, have you?" I would shyly say, "No, señor." "You wouldn't tell anyone about our special connection, because I'm doing it for your own bright future, right?" I would reply, with a shaky voice, "No, sir." Then this question would be the one that would always leave me confused and questioning myself. "You haven't given your body to anyone, have you?" I felt so awkward, because I had no idea what he meant by that at all. All I knew was that no one had ever touched me as awkwardly as he had. "No, sir," I would reply. Mr. Miranda would say, "Yvonne, you're very special to me, and I couldn't live knowing you did those things without telling me." I couldn't communicate with my teachers due to the language barrier, and my friends were struggling as well. I had enough from this creep. After my first semester, I made a promise to myself that I would study day and night to learn the language, and I had a good relationship with Miss B, my history teacher. In broken English, I told her about Mr. Miranda. Miss B looked surprised, but seemed to have put two and two together. Days passed. Then a typical day after school, Mr. Miranda had me in his office telling me that he was taking me out for a drive in his brand new shiny white Corvette with a bright red interior, and that he was going to buy me nice things that my family couldn't afford, and that he would be taking me to the mall after. I then knew this man was very dangerous and up to no good. I knew my mother had told me going alone with someone in a car wasn't a good thing, and I wasn't going to get into trouble. American culture or not, I wasn't going to be alone with this perv. I said, "I need to use your phone so I can tell my mum where you'll be taking me." He rapidly went, "No, don't call her. I already told her that you'll be with me the rest of the day." I gasped and asked with a whisper, "The rest of the day?" "What?" Mr. Miranda replied. "Don't you trust me? Do you think I would ever hurt such a beautiful girl like you? What kind of monster do you think I am?" I started to scream and sprinted towards the door, but it was locked. I was cornered like an animal. I continued screaming and throwing whatever I could towards the windows to make noise. Then Mr. Miranda just said, "There's no one here. It's just you and I." He proceeded to say that he had done everything for me, and all of my actions towards him were of an ungrateful brat that needed to learn a lesson. He then cornered me, grabbing me, rubbing his junk against my body and trying to take off my blouse, with my blouse buttons flying everywhere, exposing my flat chest. Meanwhile, I was kicking and screaming. He was putting his full mouth wide open into my face. I had endured his breath for many months, but now this was the living nightmare, slobbering all over my face. Then for a minute I was terrified of this man's actions. I honestly thought he would eat my face. You see, I hadn't even had a kiss yet. I managed to latch onto his lower lip and bite it as hard as I could, and he stumbled back, letting me loose from his tight grip. I looked up and noticed the obvious blood dripping from his mouth. My survival instinct was continue to scream for him to unlock the door, when miraculously someone busted the door. It was my beautiful history teacher, Mrs. B, and the security guard campus. I was crying, half-dressed, but had been rescued. I was reassured by school officials that I would never see Mr. Miranda again, and my family was surprised at this, but happy that the monster was gone for good. If something feels off, listen to your gut instinct, because that could save you from going through what I endured. Don't let anyone steal your innocence or make you do things you're uncomfortable with. And this beautiful American culture has nothing to do with the behavior of this awful man. In case you're wondering, I became a successful woman. I graciously accepted a full-paid scholarship to a very reputable university and graduated with a master's degree in science. Don't be afraid to speak up. I know it's hard to communicate sensitive stuff to others, but what you have to lose is much more precious and valuable. Believe me, you're worth it. To all the Mr. Mirandas in the world, and the man who smeared my innocence, I have no respect for people like you. And because of you, I can scan a creeper and a stalker miles away. So I guess you could say, lesson well learned. In any case, if you're still alive, which I doubt, let's not meet again.
So I'm a law student, and last semester I had a creepy encounter with a boy on campus that still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I've had several strange encounters in my life, probably because I had a hard partying phase for a while that certainly left me in precarious positions. However, never in my life have I felt so uncomfortable and so suspect based off just one interaction. Especially considering that this particular incident was towards the end of my time in Paris, during which I'm almost certain that my friend and I were human trafficking targets at a club one night. It was around President's Day weekend, and I lived in the graduate residence hall of the university. It's a school known for its commuting undergraduate population, so the campus was fairly empty for the holiday weekend. It was either Saturday or Sunday, I don't remember, and hungover and just wanting a Starbucks, I stumbled out of bed, showered, threw on a sweatshirt, leggings, and my long tan gorgeous wool winter coat, and headed out towards the campus dining hall and Starbucks. I had no makeup on, no bra, and my hair was still slightly damp. I did not look good, and this will be important later. As I made my way out of the dorm with my headphones in, I noticed how eerily quiet and empty it was. It was always quiet on the weekends, as this is mainly a commuter school, or students live off campus. But it was especially so on this day. Now my dorm is a short 3-minute walk to the main student centre, and in between my residence hall at one end. The student centre at the other end is walled off, and leads down to a straight path that connects to all 3 major parking lots. There are benches and tables to sit outside, but people rarely hang out there except to smoke. And as I approached the path, I noticed a guy in a blue hoodie and Adidas track pants loitering back and forth by the side wall benches. He was attractive from what I could tell, but looked younger than me, possibly a sophomore or freshman from campus. I didn't think anything of it at first, as many people from the university and public enter onto campus via this path. It's just, he seemed to be waiting for me as I went towards him. And just as I came within a short distance of him, he started walking straight towards me. So I, thinking that perhaps he was heading towards the dorms or the parking lot, he started walking diagonally towards the other walled side of the path. Unfortunately, this was at the narrowest part, where it essentially bottlenecks, and he came towards me still, making eye contact and opening his mouth, looking like he was about to say something. Being a petite female, I politely stopped as he was now literally blocking my path, and I was caught in between the 2 walls, so I would have to physically push past him to continue. Now, I have always been one of those people who seems to always get stopped for directions. I guess strangers feel comfortable striking up conversation with me. I lived in New York City for my undergraduate education, and this happened frequently with tourists on the street and in the subway. So I assumed he was going to ask me for directions, as he did look a bit lost and shy. I took an AirPod out and asked, "Can I help you?" He was barely a head taller than me, and had on these red sports goggles that athletes with glasses wear during games, as well as a lime green string bag on his back that had the Navy logo on it. It was unassuming at first, but what he had to say was for sure a first for me. "Yes, you can help me. I'm sorry to stop you, but you're the most beautiful girl I've seen in a long time, so I had to introduce myself." He said this in a calm and low tone. Then with that, he moved in to about an inch away from me and stuck his hand out for me to shake. Caught with my back to the wall and totally off guard, I stepped horizontally closer to the student center at the end of the path, and said something along the lines of, "Oh, well thank you, that's so sweet." And I didn't accept his handshake, which I found to be somehow the strangest thing of all. It was not a soft, graceful, nice to meet you gesture. Instead, it was more robotic and tense. Then he stepped even closer to me and asked me what my name is. Feeling very put off by how close he was to me, I told him my roommate's name and that it was nice to meet him, but I had to go. Then I began to walk away. At this point, he followed me and grabbed me by the shoulder, jerking me backwards to stop me, and said, "Wait, I saw you come from the graduate hall. Are you a graduate student here? I've never seen you before. Can I please have your number? I'd like to see you again." Now this guy was so close to me, I was facing him and was looking dead into his Adam's apple. It felt as though he was ready to almost pick me up, if that makes any sense. I again took a step back and explained that unfortunately, I'm a law student, thinking that might intimidate him foolishly, and that I was sorry that no, as my boyfriend wouldn't like it. I told him I was going to meet him for breakfast, so said goodbye and a nice to meet you. Then with that, he finally let me leave, and I sped walked into the student centre, looking over my shoulder, only to see him walking in the opposite direction, away from me and towards the parking lot. I was pretty shaken up with how aggressive he was, and also that he had essentially watched me leave my dorm. Relieved, I got my food, then got in line for Starbucks. Now I didn't have a boyfriend that I was meeting, because of course I made that up. So I was still alone. But the school has a very open-air dining hall, and the Starbucks is always packed with people. The area has glass walls around the entrance, so you can see who enters and leaves the student centre. And as I was standing there waiting for my drink, lo and behold, the guy came strolling in. He spotted me and stopped dead in his tracks, right outside the glass walls. He literally put his hands on the glass to peer in at me, and an older man, presumably a professor, who was sitting right inside the wall, noticed this as it was so strange. He lowered his newspaper and looked around, following Nick's gaze. The older man and I then made direct eye contact, and he gave me this look of WTF. Just as this happened, my drink was ready, so I grabbed my coffee and turned away. A group of frat boys were walking towards me then, so I waved at a random one and pretended to know him as they were deeper into the cafeteria, away from the guy. The kid waved back at me and smiled, and I hoped this would throw him off. And I looked back to where he was standing and he was gone, disappeared. The old guy was watching all of this, and clearly confused as hell. I was just standing there literally shaking. The frat boy yelled out some random girl's name, guessing I was his blackout hookup from the night before, I bet. So I looked around and froze for a second, thinking I'd spotted his navy lime green bag from behind the one-side pillar of the food buffet. I didn't waste any time finding out, and seeing my chance, I basically sprinted out of the cafe and back down the path, not stopping until I keyed into my dorm with my ID. I made it back to my room and abruptly threw up in the bathroom. Now I don't know why this interaction freaked me out so much, or why my body had the physical reaction it did, as I don't have any history of anxiety or nerves, etc. But what I do know is I have not been able to get this out of my head for a long time. I don't think Nick is or was a student at my school, and I don't know what his game was or if he was put up to it by a frat. Who knows? But for whatever reason, he was hanging out on that path, and quite frankly it felt as if he was waiting for the right person to come along. Luckily for me, I was not that right person, and I have not run into him again. But you can bet every time I'm on that path, I walk a little bit faster, with my head always on a swivel, scanning for that lime green navy string bag.
This happened to me just after I started going to university. I was 18 and made an effort to make friends after I moved onto campus, and ended up with a few groups to hang out with, including a new girlfriend and plenty of people from my classes that I liked well enough. There was one class before lunch where it was traditional for people to go to the cafeteria afterwards to eat in pairs or threes. I wasn't very discerning about who I'd have lunch with, because I got on fine with most people from the class, and we were all trying to make an effort to be social, when one girl, Lily, asked if I wanted to eat together after that class. I didn't have any reason not to go. We talked about school and that kind of thing, nothing noteworthy, but she did ask me to get lunch with her again the next week. It became a pattern, and there wasn't exactly a way to start saying no suddenly. It was fine. but it did mean I lost the chance to eat lunch with anyone else on those days in hindsight. I suppose that was the point. One day in class, I asked someone if I could add them on social media. This happened in front of Lily. I saw her face jerk towards me from a few seats over. It was such a sharp reaction that it was hard to ignore, and I still remember it. By the time I got home later that day, Lily had sent me a friend request. No friends in common. Don't know how she knew my last name. I was a bit surprised, but guess she just dug through the university social media pages and found me through it. That gave me a bad feeling, but surely it was fine. She ended up messaging me a lot and commenting on anything I posted. I told myself that she was just awkward, and we became friends, if not close. I'd known worse people. She'd always got me to eat lunch with her after our one shared class. Other than that, we rarely spent time together in person. I saw her around sometimes, but I never went out of my way to hang out with her. So it was mostly online messaging and seeing each other in other group settings. Coincidentally, my girlfriend was also called Lily. This was something that clearly bothered Lily. The other Lily, not my girlfriend, who couldn't have found it less interesting. It's a common name. She occasionally hinted that she wanted my girlfriend to pick a different name, or joked about her not suiting it. She clearly didn't like my girlfriend at all, and I had an idea as to why. It was hard to ignore at this point. Lily was starting to unsubtly hint that she had a crush on me. I tried not to address it because what was I going to say? I've never known what to do when a friend makes a pass at me. I was also not interested in the least, even ignoring the weird stuff she pulled. Lily was not my type at all. She tended to dress and act in a way somewhere between a 50s housewife and one of those adults who is still obsessed with Disney princesses, if you can picture that. Things took an uncomfortable turn on the day of our last shared class of the year. Instead of asking me to lunch like she usually did, she asked if I'd go on a walk with her. Again, I didn't exactly know how to refuse, so I said all right. Our campus was bordered by a large patch of woodland, and Lily led me into the woods, and the sound of our fellow students slowly faded away. She sat down on a log and I joined her, and started talking about how she was going to miss me over the summer. I tried placating her, but I didn't want to be there, especially because she seemed almost on the verge of tears. I think I tried to make excuses about having plans with my girlfriend, but before I could leave, Lily chose to kiss me without warning. It was uncomfortable to say the least. I got out of there and was happy to think I wouldn't be seeing her for a while. I came back to university after the summer, moving into a house with my friends. Without going off topic, there were some serious issues in my friend group. A lot of petty arguing and worse. I broke up with my girlfriend around the start of that school year as well, and basically the whole mess made me recontextualize things with Lily, because it suddenly didn't seem as bad. That said, I didn't want to be alone with her. We mostly talked online. She was still constantly messaging me after all. One upside of everything was that I started dating a boy. Lily was not pleased to hear that news. I think she hoped to sneak in after I broke up with my girlfriend, but as I said before, that was never going to happen. There was a big gap between my breakup and this new relationship, so she must have missed her chance to be with me. This is where the story gets bad. At the time, I was fairly active on Tumblr. I occasionally talked about my life and mostly reblogged photos and stuff. I was on there one day when something odd happened. One of the blogs I followed had received an ask with some phrases I recognized. It took a second to register that it was taken from my About page, which made me freeze. I read the page properly. Someone was asking this completely random person to analyze a section of text from my page, asking for their opinion on the type of person who would write it. I cannot stress how messed up it was to see people talking about me like I was a character in a book that they were trying to study. The reply was basically, "I don't know, sorry," but the important thing was the question hadn't been anonymous. It had been linked to someone's blog. Obviously, I wanted to know who had taken such a bizarre interest in me. As far as I knew, no one in real life other than my boyfriend knew about my page. Well, no prizes for guessing who was behind it. What I found was like a shrine. She was using a fake name, but I recognized Lily all over the thing. It was this cutesy pink and red page. There were a few posts about her interests, but most of the content was focused on her primary interest, me. Most of the posts were about me. There were accounts of things I'd done recently. He told me about such and such. He went to a nightclub recently, as well as references to things from as far back as I'd known her. It was clear that she had been keeping tabs on me, both online and offline, gathering up every scrap of information she could find about my life and hoarding it in here in her collection. She talked about us eating lunch together and how special our dates had been to her, as if it was anything more than acquaintances getting food after class. She talked about the time she had forcibly kissed me in the woods, but she wrote it as if it had been mutual. She quoted lyrics from my favorite song and talked about how she'd always be there for me no matter who else came into my life. Lots of references to loving me just the way he is, which answered another mystery about an anonymous love letter I'd received earlier that year with the same wording. It got worse. There were a lot of posts about my boyfriend too. These weren't so nice. They got vicious, talking about how he didn't deserve me. He didn't know what he had. If she was with me, she'd be jealous of anyone else who came near me. So my boyfriend not being a jealous person meant he didn't love me. It was angry and hateful. I didn't like to think about the sort of person who could write so obsessively, being fixated on me. One thing that didn't make sense at first was that the blog also made plenty of references to Lily's best friend, Stephen. She had never mentioned this person to me. Her posts spoke a lot about Stephen and how great a friend he was, and how much fun they had together, how he looked out for her, etc. I was trying to work out whether this was an online friend when one specific post made it all click. She had posted a photo and captioned it with, "Stephen sent this to me. He knew I would like it, and I love it," or something like that. The problem was the photo was taken from my own page, and I hadn't sent it to her. She took it from my page and then claimed this fictional best friend of hers shared it with her, because in her head, she'd split me into two people. In her messed up fantasy life, I was both the perfect best friend who always was looking out for her, and her soulmate, who was bound to end up with her once I finally got over my sweet, kind boyfriend and all the other easy girls I hung out with that she made dozens of posts complaining about. Who was she complaining to? Oh, Lily had an audience. She asked open questions about me and her relationship with me, and got messages back from her followers, people who took what she had said at face value. I saw a bunch of random people agreeing with this stalker that my boyfriend didn't deserve me and that we were bound to break up soon so that I could be with Lily, the person I was clearly supposed to be with. She had this fake fan fiction version of my life up for anyone to share their opinion on, and she'd made herself out to be the hero of it all. I went maybe a month back into this page's history. I did not look at everything that was there. It was too much. I wasn't sure how long it had been going on for. So I sent Lily a message, confronting her about the blog. She said nothing. I cannot stress how weird it was to have found pages and pages dedicated to me, with her talking about how she was in love with me and would make sure we ended up together, slamming my boyfriend and building a fantastic life with two different versions of me that she clearly believed to be real, then acting like it hadn't happened. She said nothing. She didn't address it. She just changed the subject, even after I pushed. And it was like she hadn't even registered what I'd said. I've never seen anything else like it. Of course, she deleted the page, or at least changed the name and hid it so I never found it again. It wasn't the end though. I wasn't going to hang out with her anymore, but we were still shoved together in class, and she had started to actually scare me with what she might do next. I'm a bit of a paranoid person, knowing someone was obsessively keeping track of me for God knows how long. It really freaked me out. The next thing she pulled was trying to seduce my boyfriend. It was an absolutely useless attempt that only made him uncomfortable. He told me about it right away. What was her plan there? Did she hope to tell me he cheated and waited for me to break up with him? Why would I want her after that? When that didn't work out for her, she tried hitting on 3 of my older friends, and none of them took the bait. She ended up dating one of my former housemates for a while, but made sure to send me messages while they were together, letting me know how she'd rather be with me. No thanks. Lily made sure to stay in my life the whole time I was at university. There was a time when I tried to pull away from her, and she ended up starting rumors about me and damaging a career opportunity I'd put a lot of work into. I don't know what else she did behind my back, but it made me realize it was safer to let her think she was part of my life while ignoring her, rather than doing something that would cause her to get angry. After I graduated, Lily still wanted to spend time together, but I knew I didn't have to now. I made excuses about work and barely talked to her at that point. I almost entirely stopped posting on social media that I knew she knew about. Of course, she didn't give up that easily. She tried to start conversations, asked me to meet up with her, and the attempts usually went ignored. I didn't like to think that she was still tracking me online, but she probably was. I don't know how, but she'd occasionally reference things I mentioned online somewhere that she shouldn't have known about. The last time we had a real conversation, she sent me a message out of nowhere. We hadn't spoken in months, and we hadn't talked about anything serious much longer than that. Thinking about that conversation still makes my skin crawl, but I'll summarize what happened. At first, she asked me some questions about how long I had known I was queer. I told her the basic stuff, the kind of thing I'd tell anyone who asked. Then she changed the subject. She started talking about how I would feel if she were a boy, about wanting to be a boy for me. The message quickly became fetishistic. She went into plenty of detail about fantasies she had of the 2 of us. Again, we were not friends at this point. We'd never been especially close, at least not from my perspective, and we had barely spoken in years. I can't imagine sending messages like that to even a close friend, let alone someone who barely knows you. I tried telling her not to pull this crap with me, but she decided to change tactics. She sent photos of herself, followed by a bunch of messages, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, way too fast for me to reply before the next one arrived, basically quoting back what I told her about myself and past earlier. She was telling me these things, as if they happened to her. She was role-playing as me. The worst part was that she seemed to believe it was real, that those things actually happened to her. Even when she was quoting me word for word, things I had told her only hours before were now her past life. It was like she was trying to absorb my history, to take it over, to make my life part of her. Yeah, I didn't talk to her again after that. I ignored future attempts she made to talk to me, and I eventually silently deleted her from the inactive social media, which was her only real way of talking to me. I really thought she might finally move on. A few days ago, she sent me a friend request. It's sitting there unanswered because I know if I delete it, she'll only send another later. Lily and I met nearly 12 years ago. This story is just the highlights, and even then, it's only the stuff I know about for sure. A lot happened behind my back, I know it did. So to the girl who has spent 12 years obsessing over me, fetishing me, stalking me, and harassing me, let's not meet again. The fantasy life you built for the 2 of us in your head is the only place you'll be seeing me anytime soon.
This story began years ago when I was 16 years old, and I was part of an alternative school day program for youth with behaviour problems, or kids who had been out of school for years, like me. A few months in, we had a new classmate who I'll call E, and he was very strange from the beginning. He was very tall, severely overweight, wore glasses, and had a bad case of cystic acne. As the teacher introduced him to the class, I got an awful feeling in my gut, as his small, beady eyes zeroed in on me. He immediately sat across from me whilst I was on the computer and proceeded to stare at me with a creepy smile as he began grunting heavily and rubbing his legs. He did this for well over half an hour, so I determinedly tried to avoid eye contact and was convinced that E must suffer from a serious mental disorder. And I was right, as later I discovered that E was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Over the next few weeks, all of my classmates either avoided or ignored him, calling him weird and creepy, and I privately agreed. But I felt a bit bad for him, considering that he was probably unaware of how creepy he really was. I attempted to be friendly towards him, and as a gesture of kindness, I made small talk with him and asked him about his day. For the next few months, we spoke to each other briefly in passing, but no more than that. And by the end of the next school year, many of our old classmates had left, and we had new kids join our program. I eventually became the only female in our class, and E invited me to sit with him one day during lunch. So feeling awkward and unable to say no, I agreed, which turned out to be a huge mistake. E eagerly asked me to be friends with him, and I said yes out of sympathy. So we exchanged numbers and discovered we had a few similar interests in music and movies. E wanted to become a filmmaker and was obsessed with cinema. However, the next year turned into a nightmare. I began receiving constant texts from E every few hours, then it progressed to every half hour. If I didn't respond within the next minute after he'd sent it, I would be barraged with angry texts asking me why I was ignoring him. He became very angry every time I would talk about other friends or speak to someone else in our class, and he verbally attacked every single one of our classmates to me in detail, insulting their appearance, intelligence, and race, etc. I grew more and more disgusted with him and attempted to disengage myself, but the more I pulled away, the tighter he would hold on. I was also very beta and a huge doormat at the time, dealing with low self-esteem, so I had no idea how to stand up for myself. Then one day, E dropped a bombshell on me and one of our other classmates, who E was on good terms with, and he told us that he had been expelled from his last high school because he had threatened someone. We asked for more details and he told us. He had been in love with his 8th grade teacher for years, and when he found her on Facebook and realized she was engaged, he began messaging her, professing his love for her, and she repeatedly asked him to stop and ended up blocking him. So he created a new account posing as her fiancé and added all of her friends, attempting to add her as well. He was quickly found out and was again warned to stay away from her. Then while sitting in class in the 10th grade, he messaged her again and threatened to kill her and her fiancé and bomb his school if she didn't respond. He said that within minutes, about 8 to 10 police cars showed up outside the school and hauled him out, ending up in him being institutionalized. Needless to say, when he told me all of this, I was horrified. And to make matters worse, he also said that he was forced to attend hypnotherapy to cure his bad thoughts. I asked him to elaborate, and he told me that he often fantasizes sexually about kids and wants to hurt them. I was shocked to say the least, as I realized that this guy was violent and potentially dangerous, and I really needed to stay away from him. I attempted again to disengage myself from him, and even ended up leaving the program several months later, partly to avoid him. It was incredibly stressful having to see him nearly every single day in class, where he would obsessively follow me around, attempting conversations. What was worse, though, was that I began to have an inkling that E was developing a crush on me, based on his obsessive behavior. I felt afraid, hopeless, and disgusted, and I wanted to get as far away from him as possible. When I finally left, I felt relieved, as though a huge dead weight had been lifted off my chest, and I could finally breathe again. E had begun to feel like a noose, slowly tightening around my neck, preventing me from living my life. But when I left, E was devastated and angry, asking why I was leaving him. I ignored his messages, which had increased to every 10 to 15 minutes, and sometimes in the middle of the night. He threatened suicide if I wouldn't speak to him, and I felt afraid and as though I had no one to tell or turn to. I felt obligated to speak to him. E became progressively creepier, asking me if I could give him a pair of my old high heels, and when I refused, he became angry. He began demanding the names of all my other friends and whether or not I had a boyfriend, to which I repeatedly lied to get him to stay away, claiming I was in a relationship, even though I wasn't. He would tell me how much he hated our classmates and wanted to bomb and shoot up our school, but I didn't take him seriously, which I know was stupid of me, and believed at the time that he was saying these things just for shock value, and also because E had a very dark sense of humour. I eventually lost my temper sometime around Christmas, and told him in no uncertain terms that he was not allowed to message me again. He blew up at me, insulting me and sending me all kinds of videos, including rape and murder scenes from his favourite movies. He then began telling me that he was in love with me, and that his feelings for his old teacher had transferred onto me. He said that he knew where I lived, and feeling total dread, I played along and laughingly told him that he was lying, and to tell me my address. He proceeded to write my full address and postal code included into the text, and said that maybe I'll come pay you a visit. He gave me the full name and Facebook link of my younger brother, who was a minor at the time, and said, "I bet your little brother is hot." I was equally furious and terrified that he would threaten me and my family, or think about showing up to where I lived, and I began dreading him showing up on my doorstep. I barely slept for the next month, repeatedly having nightmares about him attacking one of us. So I called my phone provider and asked them to block his number, as I couldn't do it manually, and the call rep misunderstood me. Instead of blocking his number, he forwarded all my calls to E's number, which I was unaware of for the next month or two. So he quickly was able to get my sister's phone number, my cousin's numbers, and anyone else who knew me. He began obsessively calling my sister and asking for more information about me. So I called back the phone provider and they rectified the mistake, but the damage had already been done. I woke up one morning, furious that I had to live in fear of this rat, and I sent E a long message, warning him that if he contacted me again, I would call the police and he would end up being institutionalized again. He thankfully stopped after that, and I finally felt free. Fast forward 3 years when I made a post on Reddit, saying that I felt depressed. And someone in the comments messaged me, offering me advice, and saying that they cared about me and could help me. He then asked if he could message me sometime, and I said yes, message me anytime. The next night I got a phone call from an unrecognized number. So I picked it up, and a man was hyperventilating and crying into the phone, saying he was sorry repeatedly. He said he'd called the wrong number by mistake and asked if I hated him. I was freaking out and asked him if he needed an ambulance. Then he said, No, I just need you to talk to me." It sounds stupid now, but I didn't think that this person was E. I thought for sure it was a wrong number. So I just stayed on the line whilst he calmed down, trying to get him to relax and repeatedly telling him it was okay. He thanked me and eventually got off the phone. Then the next day I got a text from the number, thanking me for yesterday and how he felt ashamed. I told him it was no problem, and it was nothing to be embarrassed about. When he asked me if he could text me sometime, to which I said yes. And then he said, "My name is E, by the way. What's yours?" I felt myself falling back into the old nightmare, but tried to convince myself that it was a coincidence. I asked him for his last name, and he confirmed that it was the same last name. So I messaged him the same thing I'd told him before, not to contact me and to stay away from me, or I would get police involved. He didn't message me again after that. Then that same day, someone had deleted the Reddit account that had messaged me. I did get a few creepy texts over the next year from random numbers, obviously fake, saying things like, "Hey, are you the guy that threw the pool party at your house? Where do you live? What's your name? I just want to know if you're the same person." Sometimes I would get phone calls with someone breathing heavily into the phone, and I did eventually get a new number, which put a stop to all of this, thankfully. The next time I would see E was several years later, when I was at a library far from where I lived. It was at night and near closing time, and I was checking out a book, when just then I turned around as someone opened the door, and I saw a huge, hulking man wearing a trench coat and fedora, and he had a scruffy beard. He was glaring at me with such ferocity. He'd gained even more weight than the last time I'd seen him, and his hands were curled into fists. He didn't attempt to check out any books, though. He just stood there glaring at me with the ferocity of 1,000 neckbeards. An awful stench emanated from him, and he stood, his eyes narrowed, turning to watch me as I left. I gave him no indication that I had recognized him, but I felt growing dread in my chest. It was this awful feeling that he was planning something horrible, like he wanted to hurt me. When I'd left, he also left, and creepily followed me several blocks, walking quickly and continuing to glare at me. I managed to get away from him, thankfully, and turned into a crowded street. Then a year ago, out of curiosity, I looked E up and found him on social media. He now has a pseudonym, which he refers to as his alter ego, and he has a profile on a site that you can upload videos onto. He calls them his short films, and in every single one of them he's carrying a knife around, wearing a mask, and is chasing his cat, pretending to stab it. In another he has fake blood splattered around and is wielding a knife whilst grinning creepily at the camera. Over the past 2 years I've sporadically seen E at places very close to where I live, at the library or near the market, and each time he stops and stares at me when I walk by. It's very unnerving, and I've had people message me on a game I used to play a lot, sending me insults. The same things E had written in the past. Today I went on my LinkedIn profile. I use a fake name so people like E can't find me, which has a feature called People Also Viewed, where it shows the people who viewed your profile that have also viewed other profiles. All of them were filmmakers in our city, one of them being a private investigator who is also based in my city. Now, I refuse to believe that this is a coincidence, but I think E found me on LinkedIn, viewed my profile in private mode, and also viewed the profiles of these other people. I'm wondering if E has already or is planning on hiring a private investigator to gather more info about me. I had a guy who stalked me at my job. He would come in and ask for me specifically. He'd look me up on all social media platforms and ask me extremely inappropriate questions, even begging me for sex. After I told him to never speak to me again, because he'd made me feel so comfortable and didn't understand the word no, he then went one further and began waiting in his car for me when I'd walk out of work at night. During COVID though, we'd leave out of the fire escape door, as that's where our screening room was, and he would wait for me there to come out. I usually walked out alone as I was the only one in my department that was closing up at the time, but otherwise I'd usually have our 6'3", terrifying-looking asset protection guy walk me out, or 2 managers who'd walk me to my car, and I bought some pepper spray and a pocket knife that I kept on me at all times. But one night there was nobody to walk me out, so I had to go alone. This dude, as usual, was waiting in his car, and he started to get out. I was now terrified because there was nobody else out there, and everybody had left, so I took out my pocket knife and flipped it open. It's a rainbow knife that I keep extremely sharp, because I would sometimes use it at my job to open freight boxes. But I was seriously prepared to kill this guy if he came near me. I held it out where he'd be sure to see it, which I think he must have, because he then closed his door and quickly peeled out of the lot. I was so scared that he'd follow me home, that I weaved through the back roads until I was sure he wasn't there. I never saw him again after that, and he's never tried to contact me. I no longer work at that job due to poor management, and am now at a nursing home close to the middle school in my town, which is closer to where I live. So hopefully now that I don't have to deal with creepy customers, just goofy old men, I won't have to fear for my life anymore. We aren't allowed weapons of any kind at the nursing home, not even in our cars. And luckily I usually leave alone, as the CNAs don't really pay attention to us laundry staff.
Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed tonight's collection of stories. Being stalked is always unfortunate and quite frankly rather disturbing. If you did enjoy tonight's collection, thank you so much. Don't forget to leave a comment and a like and all the usual good stuff. It really, really means a lot to me. You guys are the best. Thank you. Also, I would like to again thank Miss Fearsome for joining me in tonight's video. It really does mean a lot. Especially because Leonora wouldn't stop screaming, and yeah, it made it very hard to record this video. I did manage to edit all the screams out, I think, hopefully. So there you go. If you caught one, be sure to timestamp it. And I would like to extend a huge thank you to my members, patrons, and coffee supporters. Just a little update. I have actually, or am about to, discontinue my coffee. So for anyone who is donating to me on there or is planning to, there will be no need, because it will shortly disappear. I think we'll wrap it up here for now. Thank you all so much for watching. It means the world to me. If you want more listening material, there's some stuff on screen you can check out right now, as well as Miss Fearsome's channel and links in the description and on screen. But for now, stay awesome, and I will see you in the next one.